Developed exclusively for PlayStation 3, Demon's Souls is arguably the most overlooked game in the Souls series. It was a revelation in 2009, a mystery as players took their first uncertain steps into Boletaria. From the Gothic Palace front to its dragon-besieged bridges, every area was built on Sony's Fire engine to create a unique sense of dread. But being playable on just one console has only added to the game's allure. With Dark Souls getting the Remaster treatment this year, Demon's Souls will soon be the only Souls game not playable on PS4, and with Demon's Souls online servers having shut down earlier in 2018, almost a decade on from release, the call for its own modern day remaster is bigger than ever. Even in the PS3 original, there's a lot to praise though. Next to Dark Souls or Bloodborne, the atmosphere of Demon's Souls still feels unique. From the eerie calm of the Nexus hub area, each archstone gave access to increasingly horrifying areas and enemies. By today's standards, mechanically, it also feels like a successful prototype for later games. Demon's Souls reprised the horror fantasy aspect of From Software's own King's Field series, but it did so with a few major new twists on its engine. From its third-person targeting system, 3D world navigation, to the bloodstain mechanics and online networking, the DNA of the Souls series was established here. Perhaps Demon's Souls' most distinctive design choice was the use of Havoc physics though. As with later games, physics properties play an integral part in hit detection on shields and armor as you navigate each corner. And so for example, larger shields logically give more coverage from head to toe from oncoming arrows, while a player's angle, height and position play into that dynamic as well. It creates a genuine sense of physical presence in the world, and the same goes for the environmental details. Whether it's smashing through barrels or sentry blocks, dangling chains, rolling cannonballs, or even the rubber chicken style ragdoll physics, From Software made sure to make use of PS3's cell processor to fill static environments with more life and movement. Dark Souls expanded on these ideas 2 years later, but it's in Demon's Souls that From Software nailed the core formula. Every Souls game since aimed to create more complex environments, enemies, while sporting still higher resolution textures. The team has come a very long way, especially looking at Bloodborne on PS4 with its reworked lighting model and shaders, all of which lead you to look back on Demon's Souls to see a great game, and one that took great initiative. At the same time though, it's also one that's been left behind in the technological stakes. A remaster is needed. Okay, without being too harsh on a 2009 game, let's consider the options. Looking at the game's playback on PS3, there are shortcomings that could be updated for the modern day. An easy pick is the resolution, stuck at a native 1280x720 on PS3. 720p in itself is expected of the era, but even at the time, image quality was rough, with limited anti-aliasing on the character's sharp armor outlines. A boost to 1080p on PS4 or beyond on PS4 Pro would be a fair expectation here, along with a more even frame rate. Between the heavy physics interactions on barrels and its deluge of alpha effects, sub 30fps drops are very commonplace. All this can be fixed on modern hardware of course. With a 30fps cap, it's no surprise the Souls series' distinctive frame pacing issues are present on PS3, adding that erratic motion even in the best case. For a PS4 remaster in the vein of Dark Souls, which will target 60fps, those frame time spikes could theoretically be fixed. At the very least, a stable 30fps is a must for a remake or remaster to feel justifiable, though you'd really hope there'd be more to the visual upgrade if that were the case. To be frank though, a resolution and frame rate bump alone won't cut it for Demon's Souls re-release. Case in point, replaying the game this week has been an eye-opener, not just to see it on the original hardware, but also in emulation on PC. It's come a long way, but the latest RPCS 3 build runs Demon's Souls surprisingly well. It's stable, and can even be forced to run at 4K resolution. So here it is in all its glory, running at 3840x2160 on PC, with anisotropic filtering also bumped to 16 times. You will need a powerhouse PC to run the program of course, in our case a Ryzen Threadripper 1950X with a GTX 1080 Ti. There are some rough points in the emulation, but clearly this gives a great insight into how a basic 4K remaster might look. Now sadly, frame rates on PC are capped based on game logic, meaning we're still only hitting 30fps at best. Also, you'll notice performance drops as the emulator tries to simulate those Havoc physics on one CPU thread. It can turn into a slideshow, but in general frame rates are consistent. A few other glitches turn up, notably the intensity of the lens flare effect, but the game simulation still ticks along accurately otherwise, and it's all very playable. Ultimately, it goes to prove a basic 9 times increase in resolution can flatter the original Demon's Souls design, but only to a point. 4K playback shows how far flung the draw distances are, for example, with barely any pop-in in sight. Then again, 4K does highlight a few shortcomings. Environments stick to a rigid geometric design with some visibly low resolution texture work, clearly built around the PS3's restricted video RAM limits. Inevitably, those distant 2D backdrops come across as flat and disconnected from the scene too. Even with the helping hand of 16 times filtering, it's clear a PS4 version will need reworked assets to make 1080p or even 4K feasible. Equally, post effects like depth of field run with a low res buffer that fits the 720p original quite nicely, but on a larger scale will need tweaking. It's easy to be critical though. Even without anti-aliasing applied at the emulator level, RPCS3 has the game looking better than I'd ever imagined. Sure, it pulls the curtain back on Demon's Souls' strengths and weaknesses. Shader work on armor, for example, being simplistic next to Dark Souls, while the world lacks ambient occlusion in general. But overall, it's clear the game has relevance today. The question then is how a PS4 re-release could take form and who'd be up for the job. The gut reaction choice for this project would be BLOODBORNE, the masters of the remaster. Hot off the heels of the excellent Shadow of the Colossus remake on PS4, which rebuilt the game on its own engine using new assets, the team has noted it's already working on a bigger project. That may or may not be Demon's Souls, it's all speculation at this point. But what's clear is, the approach BLOODBORNE took on Shadow of the Colossus is a perfect fit for Demon's Souls. What we're after here is something that toes the line between a remaster and a more ambitious remake, keeping the core game logic intact while upgrading textures and much more. There is a temptation to go too far, of course. From Software itself is no stranger to revisiting its own work, especially if you look at Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin on PS4 and Xbox One. In that case, you had a last gen game running at 1080p 60 on modern hardware, but also with a redesign to enemy placement. As a second venture into the world, it added a fun twist and made it fresh to explore all over again. However, for purists, it was frustrating to not have the original PS3 layout as an option at all. Ideally, Demon's Souls will return, visuals and audio enhanced as you'd expect, but with faith to the original design. You could add a laundry list of quality of life improvements to that as well. The Souls series has, over time, made its menus easier to navigate, and those changes could be retrofitted. Using multiple hero souls, for example, was a chore in Demon's Souls, leaving you to use each item in turn rather than as a group. Likewise, you had to level up each stat individually, one at a time, rather than being able to do several in one go. Later games fixed this and much more, and all of that you'd expect would make a return. All this is speculative, of course. The fact is, Demon's Souls has a special place in the hearts of gamers who imported it, myself included, all the way from Asia back in 2009. It's only by positive word of mouth that it eventually came west, but even then, there was no telling how big the series would become. 4 Souls games later, including Bloodborne, Demon's Souls is still fondly remembered for that harsh, brutal gothic fantasy setting, and the introduction of so many mechanics we take for granted in the series. But it's also the one fading fastest from view, as each game improves on the last. Whether it's a simple 4K 60 repackaging with dedicated servers, or something more involved, Demon's Souls deserves a revival in attention. Being able to play this game at 4K on PC shows From Software owes it to the fans to show the series' starting point with an updated console version, whatever form it takes. Anyway, that's all from me. As an in theory, I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, feel free to like and subscribe to support what we do. In the meantime, being a 4K video, you can grab the source file to this on our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net. Also, feel free to contact me or the team on Twitter. But until next time, thanks for watching.